We have aircraft that can drop thousands of gallons of water and retardant in a single pass. We have thousands of highly trained wildland firefighters, bulldozers, helicopters, satellites, and some of the most sophisticated fire tracking technology ever built. And yet, right now across the Pacific Northwest, dozens of wildfires are burning out of control, spreading faster than all of that can contain them, jumping fire lines, exploding overnight, forcing crews to simply get out of the way. So here's the question worth asking. Why? With all our resources and technology, why is the Pacific Northwest burning faster than we can fight it? The answer is genuinely unsettling, because it's not that we're not trying hard enough. It's that the fires themselves have changed. They've become faster, hotter, and more explosive than the entire firefighting playbook was designed to handle. So today we're going to break down the actual science of why these fires are outpacing us, the fire behavior that makes them nearly unstoppable, the conditions supercharging them, and what it means for a region that increasingly can't keep up. And I'm going to give you the real explanation, grounded in fire science, not fear-mongering, because understanding why this is happening is far more useful and honestly more fascinating than just being frightened by it. So let me give it to you straight. But before we dive in, do me one quick favor, because it genuinely helps this channel. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, and whether the fire seasons where you live have gotten noticeably worse over the years, because that's exactly the trend we're going to unpack, and I'm curious how it looks from where you are. And if you want to actually understand these disasters instead of just reacting to the headlines, hit that subscribe button. It's free, it takes 1 second, and it means you'll always get the real explanation. A thumbs up helps push this out to more people who deserve to understand it. All right, let's get into it. To understand why these fires are so hard to fight, you first have to understand what a fire needs to burn and to spread. Fire scientists talk about the fire behavior triangle, 3 factors that together floor. Weather is the temperature, humidity, and especially the wind, and topography is the shape of the land. Fires race uphill much faster than they spread on flat ground. When all 3 of these align in the worst possible way, you get extreme fire behavior, fires that move faster and burn hotter than firefighters can safely or effectively combat. And right now in the Pacific Northwest, all 3 factors are aligned about as badly as they can be. Let's take them one at a time, because each one is part of the answer to why we can't keep up. Start with the weather, because it's the most immediate driver. This entire crisis is unfolding beneath a powerful heat dome, a massive ridge of high pressure baking the west with extreme temperatures. That intense heat does 2 critical things. It superheats the air, and it bakes every scrap of moisture out of the vegetation. Then add the second weather ingredient, critically low humidity. When the air is extremely dry, it pulls even more moisture out of the fuels and allows fire to ignite and spread with terrifying ease. And then the third and most dangerous weather factor, wind. Strong, persistent winds are like bellows on a fire. They feed it oxygen, they push the flames forward across the landscape, and they carry burning embers ahead of the fire to start new blazes. This combination, extreme heat, critically low humidity, and strong winds, is so dangerous that forecasters issued a particularly dangerous situation red flag warning, the very highest level of fire weather alert that exists. That designation is essentially the Weather Service telling firefighters, conditions are so extreme that fires will behave in ways that are nearly impossible to control. When the weather itself becomes this hostile, the firefighters are fighting the atmosphere as much as the flames. To appreciate just how much the weather controls a fire's speed, consider how sensitive fire spread is to these factors. A modest increase in wind speed doesn't just push a fire a little faster, it can multiply its rate of spread, because the wind both feeds the flames more oxygen and tilts them forward to preheat and ignite the fuel ahead. Similarly, when the humidity drops to very low levels, into the single digits or low teens as it does under these conditions, the fine fuels like grass and leaves lose their moisture almost completely, becoming instantly ignitable. Firefighters watch these numbers obsessively, the wind speed and direction, the relative humidity, the temperature, and a measure of how dry the fuels are. When those readings cross into extreme territory all at once, they know a fire could go from a manageable few acres to thousands of acres in a matter of hours. It's the alignment of these variables at their worst that produces the sudden blow-up events. The moments when a fire that seemed contained suddenly explodes in size. And a heat dome is essentially a machine for keeping all those variables pinned at their most dangerous settings, day after day, which is why it's such a fire season nightmare. Now the fuel. This is where drought comes in, and it's a huge part of the story. More than 2/3 of the American West is currently in drought, and large portions of Oregon are in severe to extreme drought. Prolonged drought does something insidious. It dries out not just the grass and small brush, which dry quickly, but the larger fuels too. The logs, the branches, the deep layers of forest debris, and even living trees, which lose their moisture over a long dry spell. When all of that fuel, large and small, is bone dry, it becomes extraordinarily flammable, and critically, it lets fire burn hotter and more. Completely. A landscape in deep drought isn't just easier to ignite, it's loaded with fuel that will sustain an intense, fast-moving fire once it gets going. In effect, the drought has transformed the region's forests and rangelands into a vast reservoir of ready-to-burn fuel. There's also a longer-term fuel problem worth understanding. For much of the last century, the standard approach to wildfire was to suppress every fire as quickly as possible. That well-intentioned policy had an unintended consequence. In many forests, it allowed fuels to accumulate, dense undergrowth, thickets of small trees, and dead material that would naturally have been cleared out by periodic, smaller fires. On top of that, insect infestations and drought have killed large numbers of trees across the west, leaving standing dead timber that's essentially kindling. So in some areas, decades of fuel buildup have created forests primed to burn far more intensely than they naturally would. When a fire hits that kind of overloaded landscape under extreme weather, the result is a blaze of overwhelming intensity. And the third factor, topography, plays its role too. Much of the terrain in the Pacific Northwest is rugged. Steep slopes, canyons, and remote wilderness. Fire races uphill because the flames preheat the vegetation above them, and steep canyons can funnel and accelerate both wind and fire. Worse, a lot of this terrain is simply inaccessible. Fires burning in remote wilderness, far from roads, where firefighters can't easily bring in equipment and often have to rely on aircraft or wait for the fire to reach ground, they can actually work. That lightning-sparked fire, burning at 0% containment in the remote wilderness near the Canadian border, is a perfect example. It's not that no one's trying, it's that the terrain makes direct firefighting nearly impossible. And there's a flip side to that remoteness that's made the danger to people much worse over the past few decades. More and more. Homes have been built in and around these fire-prone landscapes in what's called the Wildland-Urban Interface, or WI. As populations have grown and people have sought to live closer to nature, communities have expanded into forests and grasslands that have always been destined to burn. This has two consequences. First, it dramatically increases the number of homes and lives directly in the path of wildfires, which is why we're seeing so many evacuations and destroyed structures. And second, it stretches firefighting resources even thinner, because crews must now divert enormous effort toward protecting scattered homes and communities rather than focusing solely on containing the fire itself. Every house in the fire's path is something that has to be defended, which pulls engines and personnel away from the containment lines. So part of why the fires seem to be outpacing us is simply that there's far more for firefighters to protect than there used to be, spread across a much larger and more vulnerable footprint. The fires haven't just gotten more intense, the stakes in their path have multiplied. Now let's put it all together and get to the heart of why these fires literally outpace the people fighting them. The extreme fire behavior that emerges when all these factors combine. When conditions get this severe, fires stop behaving in the manageable ways that firefighting tactics are designed around and start doing things that are genuinely difficult to counter. The first is crowning, which we touched on. The fire climbs from the ground up into the tops of the trees and races through the canopy, moving dramatically faster and burning far hotter. You can't safely put crews directly in front of a crowning fire. The second is spotting. The fire throws burning embers, called firebrands, high into the air, and the wind carries them far ahead of the main fire, sometimes a mile or more, where they ignite new fires. This lets a fire leap over roads, rivers, and the fire breaks that crews cut to stop it. Imagine trying to build a wall to stop something that can throw itself over the wall and start again on the other side. That's what firefighters are up against. And in the most extreme cases, fires become so intense they generate their own weather. A massive, hot fire sends up a towering column of superheated air, and that plume can create its own winds, drawing in air from all directions and making the fire's behavior erratic and unpredictable. The most extreme fires can even spawn fire whirls, essentially tornadoes of flame, and pyrocumulus clouds, fire-generated thunderstorms whose lightning can spark yet more fires. These aren't exotic rarities anymore. They're increasingly the signature of the West's biggest fires. Scientists have a name for the towering, fire-borne thunderstorm clouds, pyrocumulonimbus, and they've been observed with growing frequency over major Western and Canadian fires in recent years. When one of these forms, it can loft smoke miles into the atmosphere, generate its own lightning that starts fresh fires far away, and produce violent, unpredictable downdrafts that send the parent fire racing in new directions with no warning. For firefighters on the ground, a fire capable of this is among the most dangerous things in nature. Conditions can flip from manageable to lethal in minutes. The emergence of this kind of extreme behavior, once a curiosity, as a recurring feature of Western fire seasons, is one of the clearest signs that something about these fires has fundamentally changed. When a fire builds its own weather system overhead, we have truly entered territory that the traditional tools of firefighting were never designed to handle. When a fire reaches this level, it is, in a very real sense, no longer something that can be fought in the traditional way. It has become a self-sustaining, self-propagating force of nature, and the only real option is to protect lives and property at the edges and wait for the weather to change. This is the terrifying reality behind faster than we can fight it. Under extreme conditions, the fires cross the threshold from controllable to uncontrollable, and no amount of resources can simply stop them. It's worth understanding what fighting a wildfire actually involves, because it clarifies why extreme fires defeat it. Contrary to what the movies suggest, firefighters rarely stop a large wildfire by dousing the flames head on. That's often impossible and far too dangerous. Instead, they work to contain it. They build fire lines or fire breaks, strips of cleared ground scraped down to bare earth by hand crews and bulldozers, or cut using natural barriers like rivers and roads to deprive the fire of fuel and stop its spread. They may light carefully controlled backburns to consume fuel ahead of the fire before it arrives. And aircraft drop water and retardant, not usually to extinguish the fire outright, but to slow and cool it enough for ground crews to get in and do the containment work. This whole strategy depends on the fire behaving predictably enough to get ahead of it, but when a fire is crowning and spotting, throwing embers a mile past the fire lines to start new blazes, those painstakingly built containment lines become useless, leapfrogged in an instant. And when the fire is generating its own erratic winds, crews can't safely position themselves near it at all. That's the moment the strategy shifts from stopping the fire to simply protecting lives and structures at the margins and pulling firefighters back to safety. The fire hasn't beaten the firefighters' courage. It's beaten the physics their tactics rely on. There's one more piece of this that's particularly frightening and important. These fires increasingly don't calm down at night. Traditionally, firefighters could count on a fire laying down in the evening. As temperatures dropped and humidity rose overnight, fires would slow, giving crews a chance to gain ground. But under a powerful heat dome, the nights stay hot and dry, and the humidity doesn't recover the way it used to. The result is fires that keep burning aggressively through the night, exhibiting that explosive overnight growth that has appeared again and again this season. Fires doubling in size while communities sleep, forcing those pre-dawn, middle-of-the-night evacuations. The fire never rests, but the exhausted firefighters have to. So let's zoom out to the bigger picture, because all of this points to something larger that fire scientists have been documenting and warning about. The fire regime of the West is changing. Fire seasons are starting earlier and lasting longer. Fires are growing larger and moving faster. And the West is seeing more and more of what are called megafires, enormous, high-intensity blazes that were once rare and are now increasingly common. The Pacific Northwest burning through more acreage by early August than it did in an entire previous year is a symptom of exactly this shift. Now, I want to be balanced and honest here, because good science includes the full picture. Wildfire is a natural and even necessary part of many Western ecosystems. These landscapes evolved with fire, and not all fire is bad. And there are multiple factors driving the worsening fire seasons: the decades of fuel buildup from past suppression policies, the growing number of homes built in fire-prone areas, natural cycles of drought, and the sources of ignition, both human and lightning. But a warming climate is a significant amplifier layered on top of all of it. As temperatures rise, the heat dries fuels more thoroughly, extends the fire season, intensifies droughts, and increases the frequency of the extreme heat events that supercharge fires. The scientific consensus is clear that this warming is making the conditions for large, fast, intense wildfires more common. Climate change doesn't start most fires, but it's loading the dice toward the kind of extreme conditions we're seeing right now. This event is a textbook example of that amplified fire behavior. Scientists can now even quantify this influence for specific events using a field called attribution science. By running climate models that simulate the world both with and without the greenhouse gases humans have added, researchers can estimate how much more likely or intense a given heat wave or fire weather event was made by warming. For heat events like the dome supercharging these fires, those analyses have repeatedly found the heat to be many times more likely, and sometimes described as virtually impossible, without human-caused climate change. And since it's the extreme heat and the deepened drought that prime the landscape and drive the fire behavior, That fingerprint carries through into the fire risk itself. It's important to be precise about what this does and doesn't claim. It doesn't say climate change lit the match, and it doesn't erase the roles of fuel buildup, ignition sources, and where we choose to build. And what it says is that the background conditions, hotter, drier, more primed to burn, have shifted so that when a fire does start, it's more likely to encounter the extreme conditions that let it explode. That shifted baseline is the quiet, cumulative reason these fire seasons keep breaking records. So what can actually be done if these fires are increasingly outpacing our ability to fight them directly? This is where the conversation has to shift, and honestly, it's a more hopeful place than pure firefighting. Because if we can't always stop the fires once they're raging under extreme conditions, the smart response is to change the conditions and reduce the vulnerability before the fires start. That means several things. It means fuel management, thinning overgrown forests and using carefully controlled, prescribed burns to clear out the accumulated fuel during safe conditions so that when a wildfire does come, it has less to feed on and burns less intensely. It means home hardening and defensible space, building and retrofitting homes with fire-resistant materials and clearing flammable vegetation around them, so communities can survive a fire even when the surrounding landscape burns. It means smarter land use planning about where and how we build in fire-prone areas. It means investing in early detection, cameras, satellites, and sensors that catch fires when they're small and still controllable before they explode. And it means adequately resourcing and supporting firefighting crews who are stretched to their limits. None of these are silver bullets, and none of them stop a megafire in its tracks. But together, they represent a shift from just fighting fires to living more wisely with fire, which, in a region where fire is increasingly outpacing suppression, may be the only truly sustainable path. Here's the honest bottom line. The Pacific Northwest is burning faster than we can fight it, not because of any failure of effort, but because the fires have become genuinely harder to fight. When extreme heat, critically low humidity, powerful winds, and deep drought all align, as they are right now, fires cross a threshold into extreme behavior, crowning through the treetops, throwing embers a mile ahead to leap over fire breaks, generating their own weather and refusing to calm down even at night. At that point, they become less like a fire to be extinguished and more like a force of nature to be endured. This shift toward faster, bigger, more explosive fires is part of a changing fire regime across the West, driven by a combination of fuel buildup, land use choices, and a warming climate that's amplifying the extreme conditions. That's genuinely sobering, but understanding it points the way forward toward managing fuels, hardening our homes and communities, planning more wisely, and learning to coexist with fire rather than simply trying to defeat it. The fires may be outrunning our firefighting, but they don't have to outrun our preparation and our wisdom. That's the real lesson in the smoke. I'm going to keep tracking all of it. The fires, the science driving them, and everything we're learning about how to live with a changing fire landscape. If you want to actually understand these disasters instead of just enduring them, subscribe right now so you don't miss any update. Because the why is what makes all of this make sense, and it's what I'm committed to bringing you. Hit that like button to help this reach more people who deserve the real explanation. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And have your fire seasons gotten worse over the years? Tell me. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe, stay informed, protect your lungs, and take care of one another out there.